Good afternoon and good morning from Houston, Texas. My name is Catherine Brown, and I'm pleased to spend the next 20 minutes with you. I'm going to be talking about the title I, on purpose, gave this somewhat provocative title of saying persuasive communication. And I did that to want to draw attention to non-technical talks. But I am wondering if when you see this combination of words on the screen and you see persuasive communication, and then you see that the name of my company is Extra Bold Sales, is anything going off in your brain where you're thinking, oh no, oh no, this is a salesperson who's going to teach me to persuade? Well, if that rings true for you, and if you are curious but also skeptical, please hang in with me for a few minutes because I'm going to teach this concept of what I call them before me and how it really turns the notion of selling and the whole notion of leadership and communication on its head, and I think in a really cool way. So let me tell you just a 2-second update about who I am so you have a little bit of context. I am a professional sales trainer. I also am a lover of marketing, a serial entrepreneur, and an author. And the reason I have this bio is just so you can see this kind of interesting combination of having had a couple different consulting firms, some formal marketing training. I went through the process of writing a book that's done very well. I self-published on Amazon, but it's called How Good Humans Sell. And it's addressing this idea that actually no one, even professional full-time SDRs, BDRs, account managers, business owners who are the owner seller, most people don't actually want to be perceived as a sleazy, cheesy salesperson. They want to be a good human. And so in the book, I talk about tactics of how to do that. And one of the principles I teach through the book, I'm sharing with you here today. But I want you to have the context of the fact that a lot about persuasive communication is about selling. So I'm actually going to talk about two parts today. I want you to think of two communication buckets. One is about just general effective communication for leaders. And I'm going to call you a leader. I'm going to assume that of all the sessions you could have chosen, that if you came today, that there's something you lead. You are in charge of a department. You're in charge of a company. You have a team of developers, or you aspire to have those things be true. You might also be in some kind of professional or product services or marketing. And so I'm calling you a leader just by the very fact that you're here. Now, the two ways I'm going to talk about this concept that I call them before me is think of two buckets. I like to use the term bucket when I teach because we can put all kinds of ideas we have into one bucket at a time. And one bucket is the sales context. And the second bucket of communication is among your colleagues, if you are a manager, and just life in general. Okay, so we'll have a business development context and we'll have the everything else context. And this principle transcends all of them. All right, so let's dive in first to the sales context. I mentioned in my opening slide that I've done some research, that I've written a book about selling, and I want to tell you what this word cloud looks like. You've probably seen a word cloud before. In case it's not as familiar to you, the way it works is when you're informally showing the results of research, the largest words on the screen are the words that someone has answered, people have answered most commonly. So in doing research about people's attitudes around selling in the last several years, I've gathered a whole lot of data. Those of you that are research lovers might like to know that it's statistically significant, meaning I had enough answers from business owners and professional salespeople. I had hundreds of answers. So I had enough answers that I could say that one person's answers predicted another. And when I asked the question, what words or phrases come to mind when you see the word sales? This is what people say. Now, the reason I'm bringing it up here and the reason it's noteworthy is because there's really a big stereotype that we have to overturn if we actually are responsible for business development in any context. And remember, this is just one bucket. We'll talk about the non-sales bucket in a second, but we're on the sales track right now. If you're responsible for selling and you're the owner seller, or it's your full-time position to sell, this is what people think of us. What my research says is that this is actually what those sellers also think of sales, which is terrible, right? This is terrible because this surely must affect our actions, where word will be perceived as pushy or sleazy or selling used cars or as someone who doesn't listen. And I bring this up because the them before me concept is a tool to overturn this stereotype. So as long as there are bad actors in the sales world, as long as people don't act like good humans, this stereotype will persist. And I don't have illusions of thinking this is going to be eliminated in my lifetime, but one by one, team by team, if I can give people tools to overcome this concern and to act differently, then that feels like a victory for me. So I believe selling, and one of the things I teach is that sales is something we do for people. It's not something we do to or at them. So let's go back for just a second to the title of the presentation. I called it Persuasive Communication. Again, did that to be a little bit provocative, to generate some interest. I don't want you to think that just because I'm a professional seller or because someone else is a professional seller, that does not mean necessarily that sales has to equal coercion or manipulation, or even persuasion in a heavy-handed sense, because I fundamentally believe that business development is something we do for people, and the way that we act and behave in the process demonstrates that. So the main way that we do that is by prioritizing this idea in philosophy as well as in actual practice, in writing, in speaking, in social posts, in marketing. I want you to take and walk out with this concept today. Them before me, them before me, them before me. It's kind of a simplification of even the golden rule that we would treat others as we would want to be treated, but it has more specific direction than just saying treat others with the golden rule. Because what I'm actually proposing is that in the majority of your communication, I'm inviting you to consider, what if the first sentence that you uttered, what if the first sentence that you wrote, what if the first sentence of your website, what if the first sentence of your sales call, what if it were about them and you asked about them or made a statement about the person you're speaking to instead of talking about yourself first? Now, when I teach this concept, people often say, well, of course, but the thing is, they don't act just as of course, because our nature, especially when we feel nervous, is to default to old scripts and to go back to actually leading and talking about ourselves first. And that leads me to this concept of being a good guide. Now, if you're science fiction and a superhero lover like we are in our family, I raised boys, so we watched all these movies many, 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 many times. So I hope some of them resonate with some of you here today. I want you to look at the strength of these characters on the screen. Think of these people as the salespeople. And what I mean is that they're the guides in the story. This is Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey idea. Probably many of you have heard of it before, but I'm weaving it into them before me because I want you to have some more context and think about how even in movies, in great storytelling, in keynote speeches, even in this talk here today, if I prioritize your needs above mine, if I speak about what you're looking for before I talk about my own credentials, if I flip that whole thing on its head, I am being the guide in the story and I'm not making myself the hero. And in a business development context, especially, but probably almost everywhere in life, if we recognize and honor that the other person we're interacting with is actually the hero of their own story and that they're concerned about their concerns and not about us, and we prioritize the other person instead of us by being the guide, we're going to be a more effective communicator. So let me show you a specific example of what this would look like in selling. In marketing and sales, we talk about this term value proposition. And this is kind of a sweeping statement of a formula, but I'm going to drill down in a second and show you what it would really look like actually in copy. In general, we know that the client or the person we want to serve, or later in a few minutes, I'll talk about, in a team setting where it's not sales, but it's just communication, someone else has a problem, right? They're our prospect, they're our client, they're our customer, whatever you call that role. You are the guide that has a plan. You are going to invite them to some kind of action, right? You want them to do something, hence the persuasive communication, and that ideally that invitation leads to their success. So in actual sales and marketing copy, this is how it might look. This was actually the header on one of my company's websites for a long time, and it worked really, really, really well. I'll read it for you in case you're in the back of the room. Business owners are frustrated when their sales teams don't perform as they should, but they don't know why. Extra Bold Sales has a framework to train your sales team to be effective, so you and your team can celebrate your best year ever. All right, first sentence, remember the them before me principle. I said, what if the first sentence is not about you? Go back to your primary school. In the US, we call it elementary school. Go back to a middle school, high school, wherever you would have learned these concepts, and think about an actual sentence construction. The first sentence, the subject of the sentence is owners. Business owners, business is the adjective, owners is the noun, and frustrated is the verb. When their sales teams don't perform as they should, but they don't know why, those are all phrases that modify the first noun, right? Who's the owner? So the first sentence of the value proposition is me taking a guess at the frustration or problem that my prospective client might have. This was literally the header on my website for a long time. Then only after I've talked about them do I talk about me. Well, I'm sorry you have this problem. Sentence number one. Sentence number two says, Extra Bold Sales has a framework to train your sales team to be effective so you can celebrate your best year ever. That's the success outcome that's back to this formula. Remember when we saw this a second ago. Now, I want you to think for a second about all the times we have a chance, even at this conference when you meet other people. Think about all the times you have a chance to interact and how often we actually flip this. We actually say, so I'm Catherine. I have this framework. I can train your sales team to be effective so you can celebrate your best year ever. And a lot of people who want to buy from me are business owners who are frustrated. I'm not saying it's the end of the world. And sometimes we need less formal communication. This is a more formal written way of describing the them before me principle. So I'm not saying that every single time in every single context you would do something as formal as this, but this value proposition actually was repurposed over and over and over and over again in marketing slicks, in the way I would explain how I helped or what problem I solved. And so I bring you this idea, I bring you this formula to say, when we communicate this way, we are putting them, who is others, before ourselves, and people like that. Now, why do they like that? Why do they resonate with that? Because of something called the MVP list, which I'm about to share with you. So now I'm going to talk about the non-sales them before me principles, and we'll talk about how this is fairly universal and how it will work for just checking my time, how it works for non-sales communication. Okay, the MVP list stands for the Motives and Values Power List. This is a made-up term that I created for my book, How Good Humans Sell, to encompass this global phenomenon, which is what humans want. Okay, you might think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You might have seen other summary documents. What I teach when I teach people to sell and I teach them to communicate while they're selling is I say, don't forget, you might think that someone needs your database software. You might believe that it's important to show the demo. It might be that the technical specifications of what you offer is very unique and special. Deep down while you're presenting, this is what people are wondering. They're worried about their comfort, their status, and their security. And this is true in any conversation, right? If we're friends and I believe that you keep doing things that harm me, that affect my comfort or feel threatening in some way to my security, I'm going to try to get away from you and I'm not going to want to be your friend anymore, right? So all humans have these concerns. What I teach in a selling context is that we actually have to have just a little bit of language that talks about the feelings that the success bring about by using our product or service, because people are actually really driven by feelings. Well, knowing this, knowing there is an MVP list, knowing that comfort, status, and security matters to people, this can affect how we communicate in any situation. So I want you to just think about watching for this. Listen to your conversation with yourself. Listen to conversations that you overhear with others at the conference. Notice what people do in social posts. What you're going to see is that this concept of putting others before yourself, it works well almost everywhere. The best guides don't talk about themselves first. And you want to remember what people really, really want. That will help you be a more persuasive communicator because you will lead with your best guess or a question about what it is that the other person's trying to accomplish. And that makes you winsome. That makes you likable. That people like when you take an interest in them. So notice a few things. Okay, I'm very big on LinkedIn because it's a great source of place for me to connect with people. I know in this community, Twitter is really popular too. And Twitter can be a little less this way because sometimes the posts aren't as long. But if you are on LinkedIn, notice the posts, right? The ones that I like the most often, I find that they actually embody the them before me principle. They're inviting someone into a conversation. They're not just talking about themselves. Listen to motivational speakers or public figures. They do this in every talk. They're inviting people to a greater story. They're focusing on others first. Notice kind humans, the one who seem the most winsome and who are the most humble. It's very likely that they're practicing them before me. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show this screen and I'm going to come back again to this. I also want to give you a chance to ask some questions about these concepts because our time is just flying by. And I'm also going to go back and forth from this screen because in such a short time, there's more things, especially in the leadership context, about the them before me and how you apply that I'd like to share. And so the way I can do that is if you email me at this purple email address at the top, Catherine@extraboldsales.com. I was actually on a leadership speaking at a leadership speaking opportunity on a leadership forum where that recording turned into about a 25-minute podcast about this topic. It was less about sales and more about people development. And so if that interests you and you'd like to hear more on this topic, you can email me and just ask for access to that recording, and I'll be happy to share it with you. I will put the information, I think now I'm going to go to Helen, right? And Helen, I'm going to go put the information so they can rate me because I think all the speakers are being asked to use the QR code. And I think we have time for a few questions.
Okay, can you hear me, Catherine?
I do, thanks.
Okay, brilliant. Does anybody have a question in the room? There's nothing on the online platform. But we've only got sort of 1 minute left anyway, so we'll probably...
Okay, sure.
Okay. Okay, there's... Oh, no.
I'll ask a question.
Okay. Sorry, we got a microphone here.
Hey, Catherine. Eugene Meidinger, we met like the once. My question is, if, part of being in sales is you're trying to make as much money as you can to provide for your family and your dog and all that stuff, how do you kind of get past that kind of conflict of interest it might feel like, where you're trying to help them, but you're also trying to help yourself because you have a mortgage to pay? So how do you get past that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that question. I still think that them before me is useful in that setting because what I would also invite you to consider is the role of a trusted advisor. This is a longer conversation, so please feel free to email me about it. It would be fun to go back and forth in an online or offline conversation. But what I find is that any successful sales call actually has 3 outcomes. You're either going to refer them to someone else who is a better person to help them. You're going to sell to them later, but not right now because you're marketing to them because they're not quite ready to buy, or you're actually going to engage in a sales conversation. There's really usually only 3 outcomes. All of those are good for the other person. I am convinced and have seen over and over and over again that ultimately, if you're a trusted advisor who is acting in their best interest, people know it. They know it, and your reputation precedes you, and they are more disclosing about their real MVP list and what they want, which means ultimately they'll actually buy more because they let their guard down.
Right. So you might be planting seeds for later. Yeah, that makes sense.
Let's talk about that more. Thanks.
Thanks.